12 minutes. That is the only warning time between a submarine launch order and a nuclear warhead reaching an American city. And right now, naval strategists are tracking a development in the Atlantic that has not happened since the Cold War. Russia has moved a significant number of its nuclear-armed ballistic missile submarines, the Bore and Delta IV class vessels, from routine strategic patrol into a heightened combat readiness posture. This is documented through shifts in their communication patterns, their navigation update cycles, and the compressed launch protocols that American signals intelligence has been monitoring closely. What separates this from a routine patrol is operational, not rhetorical. Under standard deterrence deployment, a Russian submarine can execute a launch within roughly 15 minutes of a valid order. Under a heightened posture, pre-launch checks are completed in advance. Targeting solutions are continuously refreshed. The gap between receiving a launch command and the first missile leaving the tube collapses to under 5 minutes. Add 8 minutes of flight time to the American East Coast, and you have a window that compresses human decision-making to nearly nothing. This is the nuclear timeline that defense planners and arms control scholars have spent decades trying to extend, not shorten. If this kind of analysis, grounded in documented strategy, not headlines, is what you want to understand better, subscribe now. This channel covers the developments that require more than a 2-minute news segment. Hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. The harder issue is detection. Russia's most modern submarines, particularly the Bore class, are widely assessed by NATO naval analysts as among the quietest large submarines ever constructed. Their acoustic signatures at standard patrol speeds fall below the reliable detection range of fixed hydrophone arrays, like the Cold War-era SOSUS network, the sound surveillance system, at distances beyond roughly 100 kilometers. The Atlantic Ocean is 4,000 kilometers wide at its narrowest. Anti-submarine warfare today relies on layered systems, fixed seabed arrays, maritime patrol aircraft like the P-8 Poseidon dropping expendable sonar buoys, and attack submarines assigned to shadow Russian ballistic missile boats. But each layer has coverage limits. Maritime patrol aircraft can only cover a fraction of the Atlantic on any given day. Fixed arrays are most effective at choke points, particularly the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap that Russian submarines must transit from their Arctic home ports. Once through that gap and into the open ocean, tracking becomes significantly harder. The honest assessment from NATO defense analysts is this: the gap between Russian acoustic quieting technology and Western detection capability has been widening for 2 decades. It is not a crisis. It is a structural challenge that shapes every serious conversation about nuclear deterrence in 2025. Here is what the mainstream framing gets wrong when it discusses Russian submarine deployments as purely political signaling. It is true that nuclear deterrence has functioned continuously since 1945, not because both sides trusted each other, but because both sides understood that a first strike guaranteed their own destruction. That logic remains intact today. Russia cannot launch against the United States without triggering a response that would eliminate Russia as a functioning state. American planners know this. Russian planners know this. But deterrence theory was built on a foundation of rough strategic visibility. Each side could broadly assess the other's force posture. Arms control treaties, from START to New START, created verification regimes for land-based and air-delivered nuclear weapons, precisely because both sides understood that unverifiable threats were destabilizing. Submarine forces were deliberately excluded from those verification regimes. Both sides agreed that requiring transparency about submarine positions was operationally unacceptable. That agreement made sense in a period of stable relations. In a period of heightened tension, it creates an asymmetry that no hotline call can fully resolve. You can verify that a missile silo is empty. You cannot verify that a submarine has stood down from an elevated alert posture because you cannot see it. That verification gap, not any specific deployment, is the structural feature of the nuclear balance that arms control scholars and naval strategists have been most concerned about for 20 years. It is the reason why every serious proposal for further nuclear risk reduction since New START has struggled to gain traction. And it is the reason why submarine force posture, more than almost any other military indicator, requires public understanding that goes deeper than a single news cycle. What makes the current moment significant is not any single Russian action. It is the combination of factors that NATO defense ministries are actively tracking. First, Russia's doctrine. Russian military doctrine, publicly available and widely analyzed, explicitly discusses the role of nuclear signaling in conventional conflicts. The idea that demonstrating willingness to escalate can compel an adversary to de-escalate. Western analysts call this escalate to de-escalate. Russian strategists dispute that framing, but the underlying logic of using nuclear posture as a coercive instrument is documented. Second, the communication problem. In the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy and Khrushchev could negotiate a resolution because the key assets, missiles in Cuba, were visible. Satellites confirmed removal. Verification enabled de-escalation. Submarine forces present the opposite problem. A diplomatic assurance that submarines have stood down cannot be independently confirmed by any available means. That asymmetry means the de-escalation pathway for a submarine-centered crisis is structurally narrower than for any previous nuclear standoff. Third, the audience beyond Washington. Every NATO ally is watching how the United States responds to Russian nuclear posture signaling. Every potential adversary, not only Russia, is studying what threshold of nuclear signaling produces changes in American policy. The precedents set in the current strategic environment will shape deterrence calculations for decades. The temptation in covering nuclear strategy is to choose between two failure modes. The first is minimization, treating every development as routine, assuming deterrence will hold because it always has, and leaving audiences with false comfort. The second is catastrophizing, framing every submarine deployment as imminent apocalypse, manufacturing urgency that erodes trust and distorts policy debate. Neither serves the public. What serious analysis demands is precision. Russian submarines are conducting operations that reflect a heightened posture. Western detection capabilities face documented structural limitations. The verification architecture for nuclear de-escalation has a genuine gap when it comes to submarine forces. These are not causes for panic. They are reasons for informed, sustained public attention to the institutions, treaties, and strategic relationships that keep nuclear risk as low as it can be managed. The ocean between the United States and its adversaries has never been as strategically transparent as policymakers would prefer. Understanding exactly how opaque it is, and why, is not alarmism. It is the minimum that citizens in nuclear-armed states owe themselves. Here's the question I want you to think about and bring to the comments. If submarine forces are the element of nuclear arsenals least subject to verification, And if verification is the foundation on which every successful arms control agreement has been built, what does a serious path toward reduced nuclear risk actually look like in 2026? Leave your answer below. The most considered responses always shape the follow-up coverage. If this analysis gave you something that a news headline couldn't, share it. Someone you know needs to understand this better than the headline version allows. Subscribe for the work that takes the hard questions seriously.